Hearing this morning in the Committee on Planning, Development and Transportation. My name is Michelle Wu. I serve as City Councilor at Large and Chair of this committee, and I'm joined by my colleagues. Two are the sponsors, co-sponsors of this hearing order, Councilor Lydia Edwards and Councilor Anissa Sabi-George, as well as Councilor Frank Baker. And we are expecting the other co-sponsor, Councilor Tim McCarthy, shortly. He's coming from an event in the district. Just a few reminders before we get started. Today's public hearing is being recorded and broadcast live on Comcast 8 and RCN 82, as well as streaming on the City of Boston website. Please silence your cell phones and other devices. And this is a public hearing, so we will take testimony throughout the hearing. We'll start after statements from councilors with a few members of the public who wish to testify. Then we will go to a panel featuring representatives from the administration. And then, again, a few more members of the public who wish to testify, and then a panel of experts, and then open it up for any remaining members of the public who want to speak. So today's hearing is on docket number 1511, order for a hearing regarding regulations of the proximity of certain businesses to recovery facilities. Again, I will open it up to comments from my colleagues here, and then we'll do public testimony, and then proceed to the panel. So starting with the lead sponsor, Councilor Lydia Edwards.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you for hosting this, I think, a very important conversation, and one that is very relevant to the emerging industry that we have in Massachusetts. I want to do a couple things in my opening comments. I want to set the record straight, and I want to be very clear about what I saw as the goals for today's hearing. One, it's to kick off a conversation. It's to make sure that we are the people who are directly in the trenches dealing with addiction, dealing with mental health services, dealing with how to work with people who are struggling on a regular basis, that they are at the table to also help to influence how this regulation is going to be rolled out. And far too many times I've found in conversations, either with the retailers or with the public, that those voices, those experts or those who have been in the trenches or those people who are survivors and thrivers past addiction are not at the table. This is not at all a conversation questioning legalization of marijuana. It is a legalized industry. I myself voted to legalize this industry. I felt it was an equity issue. I felt it was one of dealing with systemic racism in our criminal justice system. So therefore I support and would vote again to legalize marijuana. That being said, I do think that in my role as a city councilor, and all of our roles as a city councilor, when we're dealing with an emergent industry, zoning is very key to health, and that's where we have the most influence. In looking at how we zone, how we space, how we regulate any industry. It's true, in many cases, the same regulation and screening and thought process that we're having now when it comes to marijuana was never thought of or never implemented when it comes to alcohol. And we probably have learned a great deal of hard-learned lessons about that. It's very true that we have not taken that perspective, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't. There wasn't, for example, an equity analysis at all when it comes to a lot of liquor licenses until it was too late. Does that mean we shouldn't be having that conversation now when it comes to marijuana? And there may have not been enough of a conversation about a buffer zone, about advertising that a lot of alcohol stores get to do, and how they advertise and target to children. We only found that actually when it comes to cigarette companies, that there was a direct concerted effort to get our kids addicted to cigarettes. So having a conversation for the first time is not a bad thing. I think it means you're bringing a unique perspective to an emerging industry in dealing with this issue. There is no buffer zone proposed today. And I want to repeat that again. I know it's been stated publicly that there is a buffer zone. There isn't one. There is no half-mile buffer zone suggested. As a matter of fact, there are some people we invited here today to even see if, to testify if they felt one was necessary. And they may say that they don't find that it's necessary. The point is that they're here to say it. The point is the conversation. This is also a conversation about how we should be talking about marijuana and this emerging industry. I would encourage those proponents and opponents to rise to the level of adult conversation and quit fear-mongering on both sides. I find that those who oppose it have used bad science, and those who have proposed it have used bad science. And they use it, and they use people who have gone through addiction as playthings for their ultimate goals of being able to make money or oppose an industry. It's childish. This is an adult conversation. It's about regulation. It's about what's sustainable. And because this is the first time that in many of our lifetimes, that we'll be rolling out a new industry, the goal is to get it right. So yes, we might be moving slower than what most people had intended, but it's worth that to get it done right. So I only say that, again, to make sure that we get this record straight, that the folks here are not here in opposition. We are going to have recreational pot stores in East Boston, in South Boston, in Dorchester, in Mattapan, and all throughout Boston. That's not a question of if. The question is how and what is best for our neighborhoods, and that is our job as city councilors to make sure that we do that. So again, I encourage the proponents and the opponents to again rise to the level of adult conversation, stop the fear-mongering, stop accusing people of trying to be NIMBYs, stop accusing people of being bigots or trying to stop an industry. It's just beneath you. So I encourage you to rise to the level of adult conversation and assure you that when we do, we will get there as a community. We'll be stronger for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Sabi-George.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the co-sponsor for her work and certainly her interest and passion in this topic. As Chair of the Committee on Homelessness, Mental Health, and Recovery, we have heard time and time again about some of the concerns that those in recovery face as they're striving for and working towards a lifetime of recovery. So we hear about the placement of certain facilities, whether they be treatment facilities, MAT facilities, and other services in proximity to where individuals are striving and working towards recovery. So I have some specific concerns about that proximity and about the impact that different types of facilities, whether they be marijuana or others, have on the impact of someone who is working towards recovery. So very interested to hear today from everyone, both the panelists and public testimony, and better understand how we can support all our residents across the city. Chair, Councillor Edwards, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sabi-George. Councillor Baker.
I'm good, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So again, we'll start with 5 folks who have signed up to testify first, and then to our panel. Those 5 people are Will Lugier, Charlie Ahern, Arish Halani, Joseph Gilmore, and Sonia Erica. So again, you can use either podium, and don't worry about the microphones. They'll turn on their own if you give it a minute. And if you could introduce your name, address, and affiliation for the record. And testimony of 2 minutes and under. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Will Luzier. I live in Alston, Brighton at 26 Riverdale Street. I've been a resident of Alston, Brighton for 43 years. I'm the former campaign manager for the Campaign to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol, and currently a consultant to applicants seeking to engage in cannabis commerce. In full disclosure, I'm working with OmniCan, a family-owned business seeking to open a retail dispensary in East Boston. However, my opinions expressed today are solely my own and should not be attributed to any of my clients. I spent the last 6.5 years of my 32 years of service to the Commonwealth as Executive Director of the Interagency Council on Substance Abuse and Prevention, so I have a working knowledge of substance abuse programs and treatment in Massachusetts. Good government makes policy based on facts and data, not on fear. I'm not a social science researcher, but I have found absolutely no studies that indicate that a substance abuse treatment facility is any less effective in its treatment if it is located near a cannabis dispensary or an alcohol purveyor. In fact, the effectiveness of treatment is demonstrated every day in the Commonwealth, even though a store offering alcohol might be nearby. The proposal to establish a protective dome around treatment facilities is problematic for several reasons. What is a treatment facility? Is it a church basement where a 12-step program takes place? Is it a sober home or a halfway house? Is it a medical office that provides medication-assisted treatment? Further, if such zones are created, alcohol establishments are not going to be required to move, and so this idea will disproportionately and discriminatorily affect cannabis commerce. With the current half-mile buffer and the difficulty in finding siting locations that can accommodate cannabis commerce are very rare. To impose another late-inspired buffer zone after applicants have located available sites is unreasonable. The current illicit market has been supplying cannabis to adult users for many years. To transition that market to shops that check for IDs, offer tested and clearly labeled products, and no other illegal products should allay the fear and stigma that has been propagandized of cannabis commerce for many years. This commerce can and should be incorporated into the fabric of our society. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Will. Thank you. Charlie?
Good morning. My name is Charlie Ahern. I am here on behalf of Robert Melian, who is the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Package Store Association. Mr. Melian could not attend today because he's actually in Western Massachusetts teaching a beverage alcohol training course at this moment. And during these courses, package store owners learn how to do things such as check IDs so that they don't sell to minors. They also learn signs of intoxication from alcohol or other drugs so that they're not selling alcohol to people who are already intoxicated. And these training courses are one of many things that MassPac does to ensure its members remain good citizens. They also they have a long history of working collaboratively with the law enforcement and different groups such as Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And we would also like to work collaboratively with you on this issue. We have some concerns about the potential impact this would have on the interest of existing license holders and what this might mean for their business and the value of their license. But we do hope to work with you on this issue. We'd love a seat at the table as the ordinance is drafted, and we're happy to help in any way we can. So if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Charlie.
Thank you.
Arish?
My name is Arish Shalani.
Sorry to mispronounce your name.
It's okay. My name is Arish Shalani. I'm currently a South Boston resident. I'm also the president of OmniCan, and we are seeking to open a cannabis retail facility on Porter Street in East Boston. I make a personal commitment that we will be a good civic and business neighbor in this East Boston neighborhood. I truly believe that our presence will in no way impact the good work done by North Suffolk Mental Health. This is indubitably a well-intentioned proposal, but I do not believe that our presence or the presence of any cannabis business would harm individuals receiving addiction treatment in a nearby facility. Treatment centers have been operating for years in the presence of alcohol sellers such as package stores, bars, and restaurants. To create a restriction that has never been considered for liquor sellers is unfair and is a double standard. No evidence exists that links the presence of cannabis stores with relapses among those receiving addiction treatment. On the contrary, evidence does exist linking legal cannabis to lower rates of opioid overdoses and deaths. But the primary question before us is one of fairness. It's not fair to place additional restrictions on entrepreneurs who already face significant restrictions. A buffer zone would dramatically increase the difficulty of locating suitable property in Boston for a legal cannabis store. This proposal would be a major setback for all applicants, including minority and equity applicants. The better path forward is to build effective working relationships between cannabis and alcohol sellers and providers and recipients of addiction services. That approach will provide true benefits to all the involved parties. To this day, our team has collected the support of 150 local East Boston residents, store owners, landlords, and employees supporting our location at 24 Porter Street through support form letters. That is the approach OmniCan is committed to in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Arish. Joseph?
Hello, my name is Joseph Gilmore. I'm a resident of Dorchester, a lifelong resident. I'm also the president of Students for Sensible Drug Policy at UMass Boston. I'd just like to say that agreeing with the earlier statements, just stating how there is really no evidence stating that if there is a buffer zone from a dispensary and from a treatment facility, saying that there's going to be less detriment to that community. I also would like to cite a study from the Journal of American Medicine who stated that in states with legal marijuana, there's 25% reduction in opioid overdoses, and I feel that this industry can be a benefit to the opioid crisis. What's important is education and ensuring that revenues go towards allocating towards helping that crisis. And one more thing is that I just find it hypocritical that there's a proposed or thinking about a buffer zone for cannabis facilities when there is none for pharmacies or alcohol stores. And again, this would create just more issues for people who are trying to open a cannabis business because it's already difficult. There aren't many sites available in Boston, and this would particularly hurt those without a lot of capital. So those are my comments, and thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Oh, sure. Councilor Edwards.
Just to, again, to set the context correct, this would apply to liquor stores, to bars, as also to recreational facilities for marijuana. So if implemented, this buffer zone would apply to them. No, we could not grandfather folks who already exist. But in as much as we are talking about liquor license equity and pushing out more liquor licenses, and we have been trying to do that, if this kind of whatever we proposed, it would be also applying to them.
And finally, for this section, I apologize, it's a little hard to read either Sonia or Saria.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sonia Erica. I'm one of the co-founders of the Massachusetts Recreational Consumer Council. I am not opposed to having a cannabis business in that area. I recognize the studies that exist. The only thing that I really want to make sure is that all of the community members in that area are very much in participation with the businesses that exist. So in full conversation of where that 3% is going and who it's going to, and also making sure that full communication is created from now till opening of whatever business exists there. So that's the only thing that I will say. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you for your patience, Chief Martinez and Chief Smith. We have our representing the administration, heads of department, the office of, I guess, the Cabinet of Health and Human Services, as well as civic engagement. So if either one of you wishes to start, feel free.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Wu and Councilor Selby George, Councilor Edwards, and Councilor Baker for being here today and for hosting this conversation. From a Health and Human Services perspective, this is an important conversation to be having. Our residents are seeking treatment for substance use disorder, and there's no question, and I've been here before in front of you all talking about this epidemic, talking about the lack of services and resources, and the need to have conversation about prioritizing what's necessary to make sure that we're helping all Bostonians get on a path to health and wellness. As I've said before, and I won't miss an opportunity to say it again, while state data tells us that this issue is flattening out or on the decline, that is not the case in the city of Boston. We see overdoses, we see folks continuing to be impacted by the disease. And that has not changed from our medical facilities and our programs and our treatment programs, some of which you'll hear from today. As we think about this work here in Boston, one of the realities is we have close to 90 licensed treatment facilities in the city of Boston. And the geography of those facilities are pretty diverse in a variety of different neighborhoods. And while the predominant conversation around substance use disorder has been about opioid use, these facilities are helping people recover from an array of substances. And I will tell you today, 90 is not enough. We need more treatment opportunities. We need more step-down beds. We need more residential programs. We need more treatment facilities in different corners and different neighborhoods to lower the barrier of access to care. And we have to be mindful that the needs of our clients seeking treatment are as diverse as their backgrounds. Clients who are looking for support and looking for care need to be able to find it in a place where they can get access to healthy resources and opportunities. It's one of the reasons that we are investing and doing the work as the administration to create a recovery campus on Long Island, because we need more services, and with your support, as the council support, we need those services and those opportunities to exist in a variety of different locations. One of the reasons we do that is because we need folks to have the ability to access services in neighborhoods that are going to pull them away from the triggers that might be in front of them. There's no question that when folks are in the grip of disease, when folks are battling addiction, seeing folks use drugs in neighborhoods or down the street or in a variety of different scenarios that you all are aware of can be a challenge for folks to stay in treatment, to stay in recovery, and some of those triggering experiences. We don't need to look at a study to tell you. Folks that are battling this illness will tell you that in themselves is a challenge. But why we see that as a case and we understand this conversation, I think one of the challenges we face is a balance, trying to figure out how we think about access to services, access to opportunities around recovery, but also how we make sure that a conversation you all led here, that it was important to me to watch and see about equity around access, around cannabis dispensaries and recreational cells and everything that exists, that making sure we find that balance between those facilities, their neighborhoods, and the treatment programs that exist. You're never going to hear me as the Chief of Health and Human Services not talk about what's going to keep Boston healthy, not talk about the path of making sure that folks are healthy. And as we think about that, we do have new complexities around recreational marijuana use that we have to consider and think about, especially when it comes to young people. But this path of thinking about regulations and zoning and what that could look like is a conversation that has to take into account the balance of neighborhood voices, neighborhood perspective, and going through a conversation to ensure that people can have their voices heard, while at the same time making sure that we balance that out with where people are getting their treatment and their needs met. The one concern that I'll offer to you all is, as we look for more treatment, one of the questions I think we need to put in the mix, if an ordinance like this was to come about, what would happen if we want to put a treatment facility in a place where there may be a marijuana recreational store, there may be a liquor store? Will the opposite be true, that now treatment programs or recovery centers will have a challenge being cited in the community? Because let's be clear, they also already have a challenge being cited in a community. Neighborhoods often don't want these facilities in their neighborhoods either. And so that's another challenge that I would raise up. We think stakeholder voice is critical to this process, and Chief Smith is going to sort of talk through that, because this is where we think the balance is necessary, where we think that this is probably the process that's most likely to help us have that balance between how do we make sure people can get their needs met in the right facilities that are not triggered, but how do we make sure we're creating equitable access for an industry that we all agree is legal and that is here in front of us today. So I'm going to turn it over to Chief Smith to sort of talk about what we think is sort of that path to make sure that we can do this balance as a city.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Madam Chair and members of the council. I'm just going to touch off a little bit on from the conversation I had with you guys in the council at the last hearing last week, because it's similar in nature, citing for this thing. You know, our concern is when we were discussing what, if any, zoning changes we should make, we actually sat around and had a whole host of series of lists of things that we could add. Should we add bus stops? Should we add parks? Should we add daycare centers? Getting the conversation daycare center. Anybody can have a daycare center and a triple decker, okay? So how do we find those? How do we plot those? We talked about sober homes. Sober homes aren't really defined by the state, but they are everywhere and they are prevalent. And in some neighborhoods have a lot of sober homes, more than any other neighborhood. So if we were to put an ordinance like this, the concern would be if you would label sober homes, there are easily 3 or 4 neighborhoods would easily not be able to have an equitable recreational license put into that neighborhood. And so what we did was we said, let's have a conversation. Let's do the school zone, and we'll do the buffer between the facilities to make sure they're spread out, and so that way they're not consolidated in one neighborhood. And let's see and keep an eye on how the industry is going. And we feel that the residents will actually be the ones that will be able to dictate whether or not they want a facility at a certain location. And I think that right now, community meetings are larger than we've seen as their neighborhood meetings. I know you guys go to neighborhood meetings. We get about a good 30, 40 people attending the neighborhood meeting. We're upwards of well over 100 people who are coming out for these marijuana meetings. And so there is actually an appetite for information and to actually have these conversations. And I think that, to Councilor Edwards' point, because I know there's a concern in East Boston about a facility being close to a recovery center. I think the recovery center should have a say and should be able to reach out to the community process and should be able to send a letter to the city and say, we have concerns about how we operate. This is how we operate. This is who our clients are. And I think that they should be able to be part and considered part of the process, that ultimately the community of which the recovery center is in is a part of the community. They should tell us, you know what, City of Boston, we believe that at this location is not the best, but we're supportive of a location over here. And we're supportive of an location over here. And it's just going to become this dynamic as everybody gets comfortable and more involved in this process and more, and like the councilor said, once we get past the fighting over the policy of whether marijuana should be legal and we start getting into the siting, I think you actually will see communities, the Hancock Street in Dorchester, were very detailed. They have concerns about the 2 bus stops. The store in the middle of the 2 bus stops, they believe that will impact their transportation route. So they were able to spell it all out to us in a letter. It's happening in Brighton now on Washington Street. Residents are clearly laying out what they think will be the impacts of an establishment. And so I think that the more that we get residents and organizations and nonprofits, particularly nonprofits, they are part of the community. They should feel as though they have a voice to interject with the city, but that should be the process as opposed to putting zoning in, because I would just worry that as we add more items to the list, we are definitely shrinking the small amount of land we have in the city of Boston, and I'd be worried about getting the number of licenses that we're supposed to get out in the city out. So that would be my concern.
Thank you both. Would you also make sure, I know I see a bunch of folks from the administration in the room, Brendan and others, would you make sure just to highlight who the experts that you brought with you in case councilors have questions, zoning, et cetera?
Yeah, so briefly, I'll introduce our staff that's here. We have folks from the Mayor's Office of Recovery Services, Brendan Little, who's also here, who I think would be able to address any issues that might be on that front. So I think that's it on my end, and then I'll let you do yours.
None of my staff are here, but we have Brian Glasscock from the BPDA, Alexis Catrago, who is the Director of Emerging Industries, and Mayor Walsh's Intergovernmental Relations team.
Thank you. And I also want to recognize that Councilor McCarthy is here. Councilor, would you like to make any opening statement?
I'm sorry, I guess I live so far away. I'm sorry.
Thank you. All right, now to questions from colleagues, starting with Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here today. I'm particularly curious. I'll start with the Chief of Health right now. I don't know if you guys have an opinion at all. We already have, for example, the half-mile buffer zone. I think that was implemented when it comes to medical marijuana facilities, treatment facilities in 2016. But do you find, or do you have an opinion yet about any kind of distancing of the two? Just off, if you don't, that's fine, but.
Yeah, I mean, currently, and I think many of your speakers spoke to this, there's not a lot of data that speaks to that. So we don't have an opinion around scientifically this is what we see. But of course, and again, you're going to hear from providers, folks who are providing these services in the community, it is a concern they have about the lack of data and lack of understanding. And when folks feel like clients are being triggered by seeing things happening in a neighborhood, there's no question it impacts their recovery path. So we as a HHS or the Health Commission don't have here's the clear link and we're opposed to this, but it's a conversation worth having about the impact.
Have you talked or reviewed any of the regulations from other states? I'm reading here from some testimony that Colorado and New Mexico both prohibit a location within 1,000 feet of a school, an alcohol or a drug treatment facility already. So Colorado and New Mexico do that. Have you familiarity with those states' regulations or those? The
zoning regulations, we do not. We don't have familiar with that. We've had obviously lots of conversations with Colorado around how they've implemented it, around prevention, education, a variety of those pieces. But in terms of regulation, we have not done that.
Yeah, no, because I find it interesting that Colorado, I think, has like 700 dispensaries, and they managed to do so with, granted, their distance is only 1,000 feet, but they were able to do so with schools and with treatment facilities and have still what some would consider a very thriving industry, a new industry being rolled out there. If you were to think of a kind of treatment facility that might be deeply concerned and might have some direct or might feel directly impacted by proximity. How would you define that? Because I agree that the question, I think, I'm sorry, sir, that you brought up in your testimony is how would it be defined is key to make sure that we don't have a moving target all the time, that the fact that a church basement where people meet for AA is different than, say, the community center where NA meets is different from all these different other facilities.
And Council, you'll see that the Cannabis Control Commission grapple with that same thing, because originally they were going with a plan called A Place Where Kids Congregate. And you saw that language stricken in their process, because that caused a lot of questions. What do you call a place where kids congregate? Is it a bus stop? If they go in the ice cream shop, if they go here, do you get piano lessons in a building? So it just turned into, I think, something that they couldn't quickly define, and that's why you saw them not actually implement that part of their reg.
Okay. So it would be great to work with you on that definition, on what you think, and we'll be working obviously with the stakeholders as well as to what would be a facility if that would need or would want or feels directly impacted. And I agree, a multi-functioning place for congregation may not be that, versus a permanent standing, solely functioning only for and about recovery services might be different.
Right.
And of the 90 that you had mentioned, I assume that includes all different kinds, or?
It does, but it only includes those that are licensed by the state.
Okay.
And so there are other things, whether they're group homes or sober homes or a variety of different programming and services that are supportive in nature for the same population that are not licensed by the state. So that number doesn't include them. So that number is places where people are actually getting treatment, or maybe in a residential program. Our community health centers are also licensed, most of them, to be able to provide the same services, if not all of them. So that's what that 90 is. And I stress we need more than that. I'm going to keep saying that every time you give me a microphone, that we need more than that. So just so you know.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Sabi George.
Thank you again. Has there been a calculation done with current zoning restrictions, considering the schools, considering the half-mile buffer, that a calculation that's identified how many marijuana or cannabis establishments could open in the city of Boston?
So we, when we thought about that, originally I think when we put before the council, I think it was a mile buffer zone. I think the council, through the process, you guys had come back and thought that the half mile was better suited. We played with GPS mapping, just randomly went into business centers and put on a drop and then did a half mile. We feel as though that we are comfortable with the current zoning, that we could fit the minimum of, I think, 50 or 51 licenses in the city of Boston. So we're confident that we can get to that number. I think that as the city and the industry grows, if we were to have more than 51, I think we're going to have a conversation about the length of the buffer zones. I think the council and the administration is going to have a conversation about the buffer zones at some point, but I think that we should wait and see how the industry takes hold in the city and then make those determinations later.
But I think it's fair to say that if an addition of regulation around this was placed on that would be a much harder path forward.
It would change if we had to add another factor into the mapping, because it was very tight, and in some of the places you would naturally think that you may want to have 2 establishments, but we live by the half mile. It really shrunk the city down. When you look at school zones, the city is covered in school zones, and so it was very hard for us to do it. We successfully believe that we can. But we have internally, we have said that there is going to be a point in time where we're going to have that conversation about the half mile even.
And then considering the school zones and the concentration or the lack of schools, say in the downtown core, are we seeing a higher concentration of possible locations?
We're seeing more interest in the downtown. We are.
Because of the greater availability
of space and proximity to schools. Yep.
Right. Yeah. And then what is our requirement based on the state law on how many establishments we should have in the city of Boston, based on the formula with the liquor stores and all that?
It's a little over 51.
Oh, okay, so we're about at that number. And So we could potentially, with this regulation, we would be in significant violation of that state law.
We would run the risk of proponents of the industry going to the CCC saying that the City of Boston has created an undue burden for the industry, and then they could rule that we have, and we would have to change. We would have to conform to allow the industry to grow and not be such a burden. And that's something that we do have to worry about.
And have we seen that in other jurisdictions? I don't remember talking about that on our trip to Colorado.
No.
Where that's happened.
I know that we've been mindful. I know Alexa's been mindful, both with the community host agreements and with the zoning, that we do not be perceived by the CCC as being overly burdensome, because we would be concerned about them interceding in the city's process of citing. So we felt that we saw other towns, when the industry came out, you saw other towns instantly just do moratoriums and bans. The mayor said that that was not the case. He wanted us to methodically go through and work with the state to figure out what is Boston's space. At that time, we didn't know what we actually were in charge of. We didn't know if we were actually giving out a license, whether like the liquor licenses where there's 2 steps. We didn't know about any of that. So once that all got fleshed out, I think we got into a much better space. And then we realized that let's just see how the industry takes hold. Like, we didn't expect that we would actually give out 51 licenses in the first 3 months. So we wanted to see how, now we're seeing all of them come in, and we're seeing that there is an interest. And I think that when we get closer to that 51 number, we're going to have a conversation about space. We're a small, land-wise, we're a small town, and that we're going to have that conversation. But that's why I think it's timely for us to have this conversation about recovery, because like the chief said, I have a tough time when an agency comes in and says that they want to put a center in a community, and then I have to make the community meeting and reach out to the neighbor activists who instantly just say no. And it's a tough time citing these things, and I think both industries are having a tough time in the city of Boston, and we need both of them.
And then Chief Martinez, thinking about supporting any of the organizations that are doing recovery work, that are being supportive, we think about individuals who are experiencing substance use disorders. I think my hope is, and I don't doubt that your cabinet is doing this work, is supporting those organizations, especially as we see whether it's a liquor store or a cannabis establishment coming in and making sure that we're supporting the organizations that are working in the recovery field.
Yep. Absolutely. And so we tell our organizations, like I'm sure some of you would tell your constituents, you should get involved in that community process. We want you to get involved. If you're a hospital or you're a facility or you're a program, here's the community meeting, get involved. This is the liaison doing the work. So we encourage them to get involved because we want their voices to get heard in the process.
Great. And our schools.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Thank you. That's it for me, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sabi-George. Councillor Baker. Oh, and I wanted to recognize that Councillor Flaherty has joined us too. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, gentlemen. Chief Martinez, there's been a lot of talk about how cannabis could potentially work hand in hand with the recovery community. What are the experts saying? Is that a true statement? I mean, I have my own feelings.
When you say work hand in hand, what are you asking?
Well, maybe someone wants to, when they get off opioids, maybe they want to not get on Suboxone or methadone. Maybe they want to get on a marijuana maintenance plan. Is that?
Yeah.
Do people ask for that? Or
absolutely. It's part of the conversation, and in the public health space, it is definitely part of the conversation. If you remember, a path for many people into addiction is about pain relief, right? That's how it can start for many folks. And so it becomes another alternative, right? It's part of the conversation that providers are having, advocates are having, et cetera. But I don't want to miss the piece that also part of that conversation, as you know, the city just released a youth substance abuse plan, and part of the conversation is also about the impact of greater access to recreational marijuana use on young people and their use. And so it's sort of, again, you're going to hear me say balance. There has to be a balance when you look at it, but to your original point, yes, it's part of the conversation.
Yeah, because from my experience, when people are on the opioids, the last thing that they want to do is smoke marijuana. I think that's probably 10th on the menu for the day. They're going after something else that's giving them a different high. So, and I'm a little bit conflicted on this. Part of it makes sense where you say, maybe if we start citing cannabis use, whatever it's a dispensary or a lab or whatever it's going to be, you're saying that may preclude some sort of recovery option down the line?
Yeah, I don't want to, depending on where this ordinance would go, I would never want to give a neighborhood or community another reason not to want a site of recovery or treatment program.
Right.
So that would be my concern around this potential ordinance.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. Morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
A couple things. So, I said it every time we've talked about, every time we talk about pot. One thing we learned loud and clear at Denver, from the police to the health people to the bureaucracy that now runs the show to the shop owners to the growers, the more restrictions you have, the better, because you can always let the genie out of the bottle a little later on, but you can never get the toothpaste back in the tube, as they say. So I'm all about the restrictions. I think we touched on something in the last pot hearing that we need to touch on again. Is I had a Rosendale meeting last week, very big crowd. I would guess probably 60, 40, 50, 50, somewhere in that ballpark. It was tight.
60-40.
You're going to keep saying the 60-40. All right, yeah. So, but it's on South Street. People are arguing that it's close to Fallon Field. It's, parking and, the typical arguments. I think there's a couple things that we need to talk about. The news was showing Central Mass in a big, big way with the lines and people urinating on people's lawns and waiting out for hours and hours. Even though I'm against the whole spiel altogether, I think we have to open more than one in Boston at once. And we have to time it properly, because if, let's say, a pot shop opens up on South Street, like we had that meeting last week, just for instance, if that's the only shop in Boston, if that line happens there in a neighborhood, that's going to be a disaster. So we really have to time that up properly. That's more of a statement than a question. The other thing that we talked about at that meeting is 500 feet. I think people have an exaggerated, I think they exaggerate the length of 500 feet. 500 feet is really 166 yards, right? So if anybody walks a track around a football field, it's basically from track lane to the end of the track lane is about 166 yards. It's not that far. You could hit a golf ball that far. So when people say, "Oh, it's 500 feet next to a," I think we have to make sure we have a reference point, especially at those meetings, of what 500 feet is in a circle, because it would help people understand that 500 feet isn't 3/4 of a mile. It's not that long at all. The other thing is about, as far as the restriction goes, I know there's some concerning about people suing the city. I don't worry about, I never have worried about that. We have a 6th floor that's full of lawyers, and we've got plenty of, they can get more paperwork and they can do their thing. I have no problem with my confidence in the 6th floor defending the city of Boston, so I wouldn't be afraid of being sued. And I am concerned with what Chief Martinez alluded to at the beginning. The flip side of would a recovery, let's say South Street, we'll stay on that. If a recovery house was purchased, would they now trigger a variance? Would they have to? Because usually they don't have to go through a community meeting now, correct?
It would depend on the building that they are trying to move into. If the building is zoned medical or something of that nature, they could probably slide in. But if it's a residential facility and say it's like a 3-family and they want to go in and make it, single room occupancy or something like that, that would trigger zoning, which requires, as you know, a community meeting,
right,
and a butters meeting. They'd have to go to the ZBA. And the residents they're very skilled at this at the ZBA. They could slow something like that down. They'll point to the 5 others that are in the neighborhood, and it becomes this nasty kind of conversation. And here you are, have an agency who's actually really trying to help people, and this will stabilize their lives, so we could just get them into the building and get them into the program. And that is all lost when you get into the zoning conversations.
Yep. Okay. All right. Slow and steady wins the race. Councilor?
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy. Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess through the chair, is there someone here from the Gavin Foundation? I was reading through the testimony.
We're going to have the second panel is, the second panel will be experts from substance abuse and substance use treatment centers. And then we're going to have a third panel on from consumers and the packaging
I
industry.
think he's coming, though.
Okay, yeah, so I just read the prepared remarks, so I didn't see anyone from the Gavin Foundation here, but the two folks, John McGann and Willie Ossegay, are two folks I trust emphatically on the issue of treatment and recovery. They've been walking the walk for decades, and they sort of lay out sort of three answers to three questions, which I think would be helpful to our colleagues to read and to analyze and to digest, and to feel free to ask them questions because they know it better than anybody. Question 2 really speaks to, which I would consider the Flaherty buffer. That's the half-mile buffer, which Jerome and you and I know that that's what it's called, and that's what it's called.
He was the creator.
And it gives proponents a degree of predictability as to kind of where they can go and where they cannot go. And in that world with investment and real estate, et cetera, I think that's really paid dividends, and also it gives a degree of certainty to folks that are in the neighborhoods to make sure that the assurances that their neighborhood's not going to be sort of overrun with sort of the pot shop, cannabis cafe, that it'll be equitably distributed across the city, and that was really the impetus in the focus of the half-mile buffer.
Yeah, I'd give you credit, Councilor. You took the issue from the residents over on Avery Street and the new development in Downtown Crossing, and when their position was that they were willing to allow Patriot Care to come in and be the first establishment for medical marijuana, but they wanted some protections because they saw what you're worrying about now, the smoke shops and tobacco stores popping up, and so that was a concern, and loud and clear you heard it, and it was something that we could easily work on when we had that kind of consensus around the half mile. And so, like I was saying to the councilors earlier, we're going to have to revisit your buffer zone at some point.
Yeah, and that's and I want to obviously have a conversation before we do that. Obviously, there's sort of the floor and the ceiling argument in terms of it's based on the number of liquor stores that was described by the chair in terms of what that number is, sort of where the floor and ceiling is, plus the schools and et cetera. One of the things I think we need to be cognizant of with respect to the smoke shops is that some folks see that that's kind of I guess a precursor to that being a shop. But what we do know from the ones that are currently in existence is that they're there for the paraphernalia, they're there for the smoking devices, but then they have that gifting rule, so you can get you can ask for something, and then next thing you know, you're getting a big bag of something as a gift. And that's where I think we need to be on our A game as a city to make sure that they're not being cute and they're not opening up as the guise of a smoke shop, but they're actually disseminating.
We've had a couple instances in the city where we've had to send BPD to different establishments because we've heard about the gift giving. Those establishments have been warned that's not necessarily the way that we should be operating, and have quickly changed. So, but anytime that we hear about it, or if you hear a store that may be doing something of that nature, let us know and we can look into it. Yeah,
I think that's important, particularly if we want to have rules of the road that are clearly defined, and then if everyone's playing by the rules, particularly those that are opening up in the adult use in sort of that retail market, that the smoke shops, if they're being cute and they're circumventing stuff, it puts everyone at a disadvantage.
And I know that it was of great concern in South Boston, Councilor, about the smoke shops. 2 opened up on Dorchester, right where I live, right at Savin Hill Ave. They don't have the square footage to ever be actually a recreational retail. They don't have the safe space in the back, the vault, and the processing, the security door up front where you have to get screened first and then get allowed into the establishment where there's always somebody with you. So they just sell apparatus, and so I wish they would put more investment in their company and make it look not so neon lights and bright white. But it's just a taste thing. But it's I can see that it's a concern because they are popping up everywhere. Because again, I see more. Not only do these recreational licenses are important for the individuals who have access to them, but all the other businesses that are now going to feed off of it's very important. And people are going to start making money off the industry. And we're seeing it with these smoke shops. When the CCC finally puts out regulations on social consumption, we're going to see bars and cafes and restaurants, and the city of Boston is going to have to make a decision about: do we want liquor and marijuana cafes? Do we want them to be separate? Do we want food? How much food? Is 75% of your business have to be food, or 75% of your business have to be marijuana? So the city of Boston is going to have these conversations soon once the CC puts out some sort of regulation.
And the other piece of the half-mile buffer was to really protect our local business districts and to make sure that all of our neighborhoods have a diversity of different businesses, because what happens is that the cannabis industry will drive the rent up. So whether it's the coffee shop or the bakery or the clothing store that's paying you know, a decent rent now, you will see those rents double and triple, and the only ones that will actually be able to compete in that arena on the rent gouging will be folks in the cannabis industry. And then you'll see that local business district that had, again, a variety and a diversity of local businesses will turn into, so, and that was, you know, that was the other piece of the.
It was wise to put that cannabis is a forbidden use in residential zones, but a conditional use in business districts, and I think that was just a wise choice all around.
And then whether we have the debate, and then there was an appetite on the council at one point to, should it be a mile, should it be 3/4 of a mile, and there was a consensus on the half mile. In the event that we revisit that after this thing is completely rolled out, and should it stay at a half, should it go to 3/4, should it go to a quarter? Happy to have those discussions at the appropriate time. Absolutely. And also the folks in the industry, they had a seat at the table when we were putting that together. I know that there's several folks that are in here today that, you know, that initially had some concerns, but then they ended, you know, they worked with us to make sure that we created something that was good for Boston and good for our neighborhoods, and that's why I'm going to stand by the half mile at this time.
Yeah, I think, Council, you'll find that the administration, we want to work with you guys on many of the ideas. We made some changes based on last hearing. We put some more things online that the council had asked for. So anytime you feel that it's necessary for us to have these conversations, we're happy to do that. To Councilor McCarthy, I hear you loud and clear about the opening up the establishments. Like I said last week, I'm now requiring every new owner, every new individual who makes it past the ZBA, who is now going to the CCC for the license, needs to give me a day of action plan for their opening. So I need to know, what is your plan for, are you putting up stanchions? What is your plan for day one? But not only just for day one, I'm originally asking you for a week. What are you doing for the week? Because I do agree with you. If we just open one, and right now the only one that's kind of moving forward is over here in the West End, I'm worried. It's near a T station. It is near a commuter rail station, and everybody is going to go to that one spot. And so that's why I want to have this plan in place so that we can control it, make sure it's orderly and everybody gets access to the product. But if we had some at other parts of the city, and even the mayor said this to Alexis the other day, if there's other pockets of the city where we can open these things, that's better, because now we're not consolidating it all downtown. Everybody gets to kind of open up at once. And we'll see how that goes.
Right. And then just lastly, through the chair, to Jerome, I appreciate Marty being here as well. You've really been two hands on the wheel on this issue, which I think from the council perspective, we appreciate that. You come at it from neighborhood services, but also trying to advance, you know, the issue as well. So it's been a pleasure to work with you on it, and I know some of those decisions haven't always been easy, but you've been there since the very beginning, from the very first medicinal facility that opened up, and now we're obviously as we roll out the recreational. So I know it hasn't been easy, and you've been taking some punches.
The
but
trip the council allowed me to go on in Denver really woke up my eyes, and I came back and realized that we had to get going.
But, well, you've been doing a great job, and I just want to comment on that. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. I know a few of my colleagues have follow-up questions, so I just have one, which is just to rephrase what I'm hearing. It sounds to me that your recommendation at this time is not to pursue any zoning changes particularly related to a buffer zone around recovery facilities, at least until the first sort of wave opens up. Is that accurate?
I think that it would be wise for us to continue with the community process, but make sure that more people know and feel comfortable that they can actually affect the decision-making of where the licenses go, and that recovery centers, if they're concerned about one being next door, should step up and tell us, because we're taking all that information and to figure out what is the best location for each neighborhood. I think that even when I was talking with the chief to prepare for the hearing, I got nervous with the definition of a recovery center, and I think that we would love to sit down with the council and work on a definition, and I think that from there we can have these conversations, because I know what the council is trying to talk about and get at. I think just we have to be clear about what, because when we're like, is it just the state license? Well, the state's now going to start licensing sober homes, and we're like, oh, great. And so it just turned into this thing, but I would like to sit down, and I think a definition conversation is important.
Thank you. Councilor Edwards.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I had a follow-up question, and I really do appreciate your impact analysis. That's really, because equity is for me very, very important. Yeah. So to know this could be harmful in certain ways, in an equitable way, really does influence my decision. But one thing that I also think is worth the analysis, and I'd love for you to go back and think about in terms of the zoning. Right now, we currently, within the buffer zone, include cultivation and retail at the same time.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Does it make sense then to allow for more flexibility so that a cultivation, I mean, we could have cultivation regulated under our current urban agricultural zoning versus putting it under forbidden use and looking at this. So
You're right.
what that does is instead of lumping them all in together like they're doing the same thing, you actually have them being held to a different standard, and they should be. They're talking about growing, accessing, and producing consumed goods. And so, by eliminating a class within the buffer zone, you might actually be providing more flexibility with where and how things can be located near each other. So I think that's worth the city considering or talking about that conversation. With regards to the 3% community impact fund, with regards to the 3% community impact fund, I don't know what the process is right now.
It goes to the general fund.
It goes directly to, is there any way that the city could create a process or an advisory board maybe led by folks in recovery or led by communities of color that really helps to influence how that money is spent locally?
I think that other people would have to sit here and have the conversation with you. We're not we are not the decision makers of the tax dollars, but it's 3% by state law and then up to 3% in the community host agreement, both of which go directly into the general fund.
I think it's an interesting conversation to have, because I do think in other cities and across the country, they have tried to make some links to those fees to run prevention.
And Denver does it. Denver does it very well.
Or just in general, just again, if equity folks who are directly impacted, if capital is one of the biggest issues of trying to get folks started. I think also this conversation in general with zoning when it comes to recreational marijuana, and even I guess liquor stores as well, I really do want to emphasize that delivery then might be that happy balance where folks are just getting it directly in their homes. You're not worried about where the permanent facility is going. I think delivery overcomes a lot of these hurdles, a lot of these misconceptions. People are just able to directly get it, and there are some alcohol services that do direct delivery. They check the licenses, they make sure the person does that. So I do hope the city of Boston, I mean, I don't know how many more I know you love those meetings, Jerome. I know you love the community process, and I know you love the back and forth.
It's great.
But you can't really deliver, substance abuse services, but you can deliver this product. So this might be a happy medium and making sure that folks.
You make a really good point, and particularly with the cultivation. I didn't think about it, but the cultivation one that we have in the city was relatively easy to cite, and it's because of the fact that there's not traffic, right? That's when residents instantly weren't against. They were just like, how many trucks? What are your hours of operation?
And what's your security?
So I think
usually,
and so I think that's wise.
Broken into.
I think it's wise for us to look at that. For the other, yes, community meetings are great, and we'll have many conversations as we can. And I think that it's just important to make sure, like he said, that we just have a balance. And I think that we're really willing to work with it. I think that we're starting to see it slowly. The residents are, it's taking a little time, and they're just slowly, the more and more meetings. I think we have 2 tonight. We have 1 next week, and I think they're slowly getting used to this process. And so the more that we keep talking about it and raising issues as it comes along and coming in and saying, hey, this was brought up as an issue, how do we address it? I think that we'll do a better job, and we'll have a better industry here in the city.
Okay. And just through the chair, I wanted to compliment Councilor Flaherty on the history lesson, but also understanding that flexibility was built into the half-mile buffer zone, which I was not aware of, that it's intended to start the conversation and continue it as well, and looking at it as it roll out. So I really do appreciate that perspective. That's all for me.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor McCarthy? Or Councilor Baker, do you have a segment? Sorry.
So how do we come up with a number of 50? I thought it was based on 20% of the package stores.
That's the number, Councilor.
Okay, so there's 250 package stores?
There's a little over 250 liquor, retail liquor establishments in the city.
Okay. And just kind of a statement, I think when we talk about equity in the industry, I think we should a grow for me, a lab for me, manufacturing, I think that's where our opportunities to grow like a workforce. No pun intended there. But if when we're negotiating with the people that are coming in to look to do business, I think there needs to be security plans, this plan, that plan, training plan. How are you training people to get in these doors here, and how are we going to train someone that may have an interest? How are we going to train that person to get into that grow and have the ability to become a head grower, you know, in 5 or 6 years.
I think that the administration, and you heard John Barros at the last meeting, that we're trying to find ways where we can actually do some of the job training and job skills and getting more people involved. It just is, where do we find the money for it? It can't be associated with any sort of federal grant money. But I believe that there is a conversation that the administration's having about workforce development and city dollars that we actually do have the ability to get money for. You know, one of the great things was over in Orchard Gardens, the facility that's being cited at 100 Hampden Street, they made a commitment on their own, it's not in the community host agreement, it's their commitment to the community where they're actually going to hire residents from Orchard Gardens to bring them in to teach them the industry and to work in the industry. And I think that's great. Not everybody wants to be a retail licensee holder, but they definitely want to, maybe they want to get into the cultivation business. But the fact that they're across the street and decided that we are going to invite these members of the community to come and work in our industry and learn the industry, I thought that was great. And I think that more and more as these companies come in, they should start wanting to be good neighbors. And being a good neighbor is how are you going to uplift the neighborhood that you're in? Well, you should probably start hiring from the residents that live in that area. And so I can't make them do that. I can politely encourage that they think about things like this, and I just think that the more that we say, you know, it's great if you want to give 10 grand to this community center, why don't you give 40 jobs instead over here and teach somebody industry? And so I just think it's a conversation that the community should have with the companies about what they believe is the benefit.
Yeah, because I mean, realistically, we work on trying to, like the proliferation of alcohol in our neighborhoods, and you know, in Dot Ave, near where we live, we have like 7 liquor stores.
Yeah.
And that isn't a model that we should be looking to replicate, and also to cite a dispensary in the middle of a neighborhood that's really been affected by it. I sometimes question if that's a good move, because now it's more access to young kids, and again, I voted in favor of medical. I voted against recreational because I think we could be going down a path where more and more kids are just starting weed earlier, you know, and it does have some implications. You know, it does do certain things to the young brain. You know, and Marty, you talked about balance. Yeah, and that's where the issue is. The people that have issues with the opioids, they don't know how to balance, or alcohol. Most people start their journey with a Budweiser, you know. So I'm just kind of going on and on here. I'm concerned about it. Yep. I like the fact that we're doing a slow roll, but the industry, we need to, like Councilor McCarthy said, open up a couple of them citywide, let people see what the business is going to be, and then you know, get to that point where we're 50. I think more than 50, we should be looking at possibly saying, I think 50 is our number. You know, you can go to, like, when we were in Colorado and Denver, a lot more spread out. Yep. You know, we want to provide opportunities for people, but we also don't want to create another problem. Yeah. So that 3%, so general fund 3%, the mitigation dollars, and so the tax?
So the state passed the law. So in the state law that the mayor put to the council and the council supported was the 3%. That first 3% goes directly to the general fund. And then in the community host agreement, we can add up to an additional 3%. And it's basically supposed to be used towards the hiring of more inspectors, things that the industry is going to cost the city. That's what the 3% is for. So that is why it's sent to the general fund.
3% on the mitigation. So
there is no.
So a neighborhood that wants to get out is okay being out front on this, and they want, you know, Edward Everett Square taken care of. That isn't going to happen now with these.
If a retailer or someone with a license wants to do some sort of an agreement with a local group, that's not going to be immortalized in a community host agreement that is between 2 private parties, and that's where it is. But as far as the community host agreements, which they are gone through by the CCC and like again, they are really looked at to make sure that we're not creating undue burdens. We just do a 3% for the cost of doing business in the city, and that goes to the general fund currently.
Yeah, that looks like the city's getting a 6% tax, and the neighborhoods aren't getting much. So I'm a little bit concerned about that, especially if we're involved in negotiation of a siting of a place, we
But you
can't
can
say.
also say, Councilor, that 6% goes to the city funds that allows you to then, through budgeting, do programs and roadways and trees and other things like that nature.
But that's, we don't have direct authority to take that money and put, you know, $70,000 into this
No,
in
we
particular.
We
So,
currently do not, no.
okay, so I have a little bit of angst around that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just a couple quick things. The tax issue, we're right on that right now. One of the things we heard from the bureaucracy of Denver is to try to stay away from sending it to general fund. Nobody loves me. This is not. I know I can yell loud enough. There we go. The tax issue, one of the things we heard from Denver loud and clear is that they wish they hadn't put the money into the general fund. They wish they had earmarked it for something, whether it's open space, parks, whatever. Reason being is the constituents felt that with all this money coming in, which wasn't as much as they thought as we heard when we were there, because once you start collecting the taxes, you're building the bureaucracy around it, and then you have more people who are following from seed to plant and the whole thing, you know, the bureaucracy builds, you're not making that much money to begin with. But what they felt is that the people who were especially on the no, like myself, felt that they felt that this was the silver bullet to fix everything. So I just caution, I don't think we can, through city charter, earmark it, can we?
I'm not sure. I don't believe so. I believe that there will have to be a conversation between the administration and the council through the budgeting process about how you would like to address the revenues that are being collected through there. And I think that that's probably, through your Ways and Means process, will probably be the best way for you to get at that kind of number. I couldn't offhand tell you the millions that are coming in, but I think that those individuals, would enjoy having a conversation with you about, you know, the thoughts about where the money should go.
Because the general fund, it feels like it's a black hole. Like you never get, you know what I mean? It's just going to go in there, and we're not going to see anything tangible. You talked about the rollout earlier, and I just wanted to jump onto that quickly. You know, when these open up, police details are going to be needed, and right now, the patrolmen and patrolwomen in our city are overworked as it is. They're getting ordered to third shifts now. It's tight. National Grid being locked out does not help those numbers. Nope. So as we proceed, we really need to keep in mind that a shop may open in Rosendale, but Captain Gillespie may not have enough people to watch, you know, a 60-yard line. So that's one of the issues. And then secondly, and lastly, actually, having Keith Williams at the meeting, a seasoned vet, doing a meeting was fantastic because, you know, seasoned vet, ONS, he was right on target, and he really represented the mayor well, so I wanted to say that.
Thank you, Councilor. Keith is my Director of Policy. He and my Chief of Staff, Eddie McGuire, who's here in the audience. The mayor wanted more consistency, so those two individuals will be the ones that you'll see at all the community meetings. Yep. The liaisons will just make sure the flyers in the newspaper, flyers went out and things have been mailed, but those two individuals will be managing the meeting, so everybody gets a consistent presentation and a consistent process.
Yeah, well, after going through 1,000 meetings, Keith is seasoned, that's for sure. Yeah.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy. Councilor Flaherty.
The Flaherty retiree detail rule would solve I just, you know, I'm just telling you, you got to get it on the books, solve some problems for you. And just through the chair, obviously, for the edification of colleagues, and also to describe the mindset behind the co-locating, to defend the co-locating was to put everything in there, because there were people that were coming in saying that they were one thing and then quickly and cutely reverting to another thing. And so I think when you come into City Hall and you come out to the Zoning Board of Appeals and you say that you're A, and then you leave and then you try to morph into B, I find that very problematic as an elected official and someone that's charged with at least you know, protecting and serving the community. And also, community residents need to have a degree of predictability that the cake isn't baked and it's not who you know and who you hire. And so when we had folks coming in that they were saying that they were medicinal, and then they were quickly either trying to convert to co-locating. You know, that's why we put everything in there together, because we want to identify who's who and what's what and what are they? Are they this? Are they that? So, and also on, I think through the chair to Jerome and to Chief Martinez is, I think we should keep in the back of our minds is reclassification. We're starting to see just this month alone, the Surgeon General is now going to take another look at this thing. This is a multi-billion-dollar feeding frenzy where folks who are usually in the investment business or in the real estate business or in the stock market, they're now in the marijuana business. Everyone's in the marijuana business. Everybody's in the marijuana business. At some point, those that are putting their name on a long-term lease or are engaging in this activity or are raising funds, they might actually, be on the receiving end of a what's up with that, and this is and eventually I think that, and from the onset I said this should be going by way of CVS and Walgreens and Rite Aid, and particularly on the medicinal side. I think we're going to eventually get there, and so for those that are going to make big time investments or shift sort of their investment strategy to throw it all on the line for marijuana, I would throw caution to the wind there. I think that if our Surgeon General and the federal government gets their hands around this feeding frenzy and they reclassify Class D marijuana and allow it to be sold at the CVS's and the Rite Aids, I guess in the back of your minds, you should be cognizant of that in terms of when we're rolling out regulations, because if that ever happens, there'll be a big vacuum for those. We've had a number of hearings here in the council, and everyone's just like, can't wait to get in the biz. This is fantastic. Can't wait to get in the biz. Marijuana gets reclassified, which is a distinct possibility based on what we're hearing out of the federal government, out of the Surgeon General. Complete game changer on that side of the house, but it will have obviously implications on the adult use on the recreational side of the house. I just think that you should be cognizant of that. I think that's where we're going to be going. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. So at this point, we will transition. We'll thank the chiefs for their time. And no one else had been signed up for public testimony, and I know that one of our panelists at least has a time constraint, so we'll go right to the second panel of Substance Use Treatment Center experts and call down to the floor Dr. Timothy Naimi from Boston Medical Center, Kim Hanlon and Katie O'Leary from North Suffolk Mental Health, Jack Kelly, and I don't see John McGann here, but okay. Is that good? Is there anyone else you wanted to sub on this one? Welcome. I know, Dr. Naimi, you have a commitment shortly, so if the other panelists don't mind deferring, we would start with you, sure, and then we can go down the line. So feel free to introduce yourself, your name, affiliation, and any opening statement.
Hi, councilors. My name is Tim Naimi. I'm an internist and pediatrician at Boston Medical Center. I'm a professor at BU's School of Medicine and Public Health, a faculty member in the Grayken Center of Addiction at BMC, and my chief area of expertise is on substance use policy, and I'm a specialist in alcohol and marijuana policy. So I was here on behalf of BMC, on behalf of our patients who are struggling with substance use disorder, to share BMC's grave concerns with the recent proposals to place 2 marijuana establishments, particularly at 591 Albany Street and 633 Tremont. Michael Botticelli, who's the executive director of the Grayken Center, will also be speaking tomorrow night at the South End about this and related issues. But also BMC is in the community as an advocate for our community, which includes many low-income and vulnerable populations, youth, homeless individuals, and those with mental health and substance problems. We are especially concerned to have any marijuana facility be licensed in an area of close proximity to the approximately 20 recovery and treatment facilities that are located at and around our medical campus. As you guys all are aware, we're in the midst of an epidemic with which we are all struggling, where thousands of folks in the city and Commonwealth are suffering from opioid, alcohol, and cannabis use disorders. And again, we're here to echo our concern about having facilities close to BMC that will perpetuate these cycles of addiction. In terms of one of our major issues is the likelihood of relapse and actually of new substance use disorders. So typically, as doctors and people and counselors, we like to think of addiction and recovery as an individual struggle. And yet substance use research demonstrates time and time again that it's the larger social environment that is the key driver of the development of substance use disorders and of recovery from addiction. And among policies across all substances with which I've worked, alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, research demonstrates that increased physical availability in the form of close physical proximity to retail outlets and larger numbers of retail outlets is the single most important risk factor promoting substance use and misuse. BMC treats thousands of people with alcohol and substance use disorders every single year. We are acutely aware of how vulnerable people are in early recovery, and the siting of these facilities in proximity to BMC and its patients in early recovery would be particularly destabilizing and could trigger relapse and promote new addictions. The BMC neighborhood also shares, a neighborhood with many individuals who have not yet found their paths toward recovery and are severely compromised by addiction, who have significant mental health issues and homelessness. Given the burden that many in this neighborhood face, the siting of these facilities has the real potential to exacerbate those problems. BMC is at the epicenter of Boston's efforts to prevent and combat the ravages of addiction, and placing marijuana outlets in close proximity to BMC and its surrounding vulnerable populations would undermine all of our collective efforts and credibility in this life and death struggle with which we are all engaged. We are concerned about traffic and foot traffic. In addition, these facilities will bring more automobile traffic to an already busy part of the city and will make it more difficult for our patients to safely travel to their appointments or to our emergent care programs. In addition, since many folks in our area walk for their transportation, unfortunately sometimes already under the influence of multiple psychoactive drugs and medications, we're also concerned that locating marijuana facilities in easy walkability of BMC will only increase the number of pedestrian injuries that we witness on virtually a daily basis. So for our ask is that for all of these reasons, we are here to respectfully request that no marijuana facility be licensed within half a mile of BMC's campus, located at 1 Boston Medical Center Place, but encompassing the full boundaries of our medical center establishment. We chose this distance of 0.5 miles because it mirrors the current minimum distance required between each marijuana facility, and because this distance simply makes it a bit less convenient for folks in recovery in and around BMC to quickly walk to a marijuana outlet, and less likely for those people also to be exposed to the signage and other street-level advertising promoting marijuana use. So in conclusion, we want to thank the City Council, the Mayor and his administration for their leadership and all the work that you guys have done on the work to address the opioid epidemics and other issues related to addiction. The city has been a key supporter in addressing this epidemic. The road to recovery is already difficult enough. We strongly urge you to help support our thousands of patients, their families, and our surrounding community in which we serve who are struggling every day with substance use disorders, and to protect them against additional challenges. We feel that we are all in a hole with regards to addictions and substance use treatment, and basically locating facilities close to BMC is just going to dig our hole all that much deeper. Thank you for your consideration on this matter. I do have some clinic to go to, but I'm happy to take questions now, or I can try to stay around until my colleagues are done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Namey. Why don't we proceed with opening statements, and then we'll focus any questions on you first.
Mm-hmm. Hi, my name is Jack Kelly. I am a long-time person in recovery and a long-time advocate. I sit on numerous boards advocating mental health and substance use disorders, and I also wrote a book about addiction and how this epidemic happened through my eyes. So I have a pretty good, unfortunately, seat of how this happened. I'm primarily here. First off, I want to thank Councilor Edwards, Councilor Wu, Councilor Asabi-George, and Councilor McCarthy for having this hearing. I do think it's necessary to have this hearing, and so I thank all of you for bringing this up. I want to be very clear, despite the fact that I've had substance use issues, and specifically heroin and opiates, which is part of this epidemic, I did vote in favor of legalization and medicinal use. I have been a long advocate for legalization, simply for the fact that in the life that I previously led, I saw a lot of people harmed by prohibition. And I'm essentially here to speak I'm here to speak for them and to speak for everybody that has been completely destroyed by this particular issue, not just with opiates, but with alcohol and marijuana addiction. And I think that what we have the opportunity here is to essentially right a wrong. I commend the mayor for his op-ed and talking about minorities and people who have been harmed by prohibition to be a part of this solution. And so I'm going to keep my statement quick and just to say that people who are coming to the city of Boston seeking these licenses should absolutely have people who have been harmed by addiction and prohibition at the table and a part of these licenses. They should be on their board. They should have a stake. And if that doesn't happen, we're essentially creating Walmart for pot. And all these investments are going to come in here. They're going to make a ton of money. And the people that have been harmed are not going to at all share in the prosperous business that's going to be here. And for me, I'm in favor of free will. I'm in favor of having these shops open. But if you don't have people who've been in the lifestyle advocating on behalf of the potential dangers, how are you going to know? And I don't know which one of you guys, one of the counselors said about just writing a check just to an organization is not good enough. People like myself need to be at the table with a real equity stake, not for free, but with real equity in our neighborhoods. And that's how we protect our neighborhoods. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Katie O'Leary, and I am a woman in long-term recovery, and what that means to me is I have not used a drink, a drug, or any mind-altering substance since January 2011. I am also the Director of Recovery Support Services at North Suffolk Mental Health Association, a position I have held since October 2013. I voted for the legalization of recreational marijuana and am in no way against marijuana dispensaries. However, I believe they should be zoned appropriately. As a person with lived experience, I believe considerations should be made to support those with a substance use disorder diagnosis and not warrant any unnecessary triggers that may cause such persons harm. Triggers can come by way of people, places, or things that can cause an event or situation to happen or exist. Speaking as someone who has utilized North Suffolk's intensive outpatient program numerous times in the past, I must say that having a dispensary next to the outpatient clinic would have been detrimental to my recovery process. At that time in my life, I had little to no support other than the building at 14 Porter Street in East Boston and the people working in it. Any little thing was capable of setting me off and starting my next relapse. At almost 8 years clean, I still have moments where I think it's okay to have a drink or smoke a joint. Neither my drug of choice. However, I now have the tools to reinforce the fact that this is no longer a healthy choice. I am extremely concerned for the individuals that utilize North Suffolk services that do not have the ability to process this unhealthy thought, which would be a great deal of the population we serve. There is no question that it can be difficult to maintain sobriety, particularly in the early stages of change. During these fragile stages of pre-contemplation and contemplation, marijuana access could trigger relapse for those in recovery from any mind-altering substances. Between stresses of everyday life, social pressure, and cues linked to drug experience, just the mere smell of marijuana has the power to throw someone over the edge and back into the grips of their addiction. Boston has been on the forefront of providing care to opioid addicts in comparison to other cities across the country. Marty Walsh stated in a WBUR interview that we have a crisis with heroin in our city. It's a difficult issue to address. We also need some willingness on behalf of the people addicted to be willing to go into treatment. My response to that is why subject powerless individuals who are willingly enrolled in treatment to a marijuana dispensary mere steps from where they are trying to engage in active recovery? I implore you to take a look at some of the cities who have already created zoning laws to protect this vulnerable population, such as Los Angeles, California, and Tucson, Arizona. In closing, I would ask the council to consider the vulnerability of individuals in early recovery when making zoning decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Good morning. My name is Kim Hanton, and I am the Director of Addiction Services with North Suffolk Mental Health Association. My testimony will include information and recommendations that we believe will help the Boston City Council make cannabis policy decisions that promote and protect the health of our citizens. North Suffolk Mental Health supports an evidence-informed public health approach that considers health and social outcomes in the development of municipal cannabis policies and regulations. Lessons learned from 60 years of experience providing mental health and addiction services in our Boston area communities, as well as the professional and lived experiences represented by our staff, have informed our statement. North Suffolk suggests that a precautionary approach be taken to minimize unintended consequences of the location of cannabis retail stores. We hope that the City Council will consider the following in its deliberations and decisions. The number of cannabis stores, including density and distance controls that prevent clustering and that maintain buffer zones around well-defined areas where children and youth and other vulnerable groups, such as those in treatment for mental health and illness and other addiction, frequent. Requirements for cannabis education and community engagement as part of the process. Hours of operation, limit availability late at night and early morning hours. Signage and advertising, restrictions to minimize visibility to youth and vulnerable populations. Recognize that there are potential health risks associated with secondhand smoke within multi-unit housing environments and consider regulations that ban smoking in multi-unit housing. Ensure that mechanisms to share data across sectors and levels of government are established and appropriate indicators are chosen to monitor the impacts of policy implementation on communities. North Suffolk encourages the Boston City Council to proceed with caution for two reasons. First, there is little reliable and conclusive evidence to support what safe cannabis use looks like for individuals and communities. Second, it will be easier to prevent future harms by removing regulations in the future once more knowledge exists than it will be to later add regulations. Of the individuals we serve in our mental health and addiction programs and services, a substantial proportion have used cannabis, and of those who use cannabis, a large percentage also have used alcohol and tobacco. The use of these substances affects health, mental health, decision-making, and judgment, and elevates risk factors that affect the individual and the communities. We encourage the City Council to consider unintended consequences such as clustering of stores, negative impact on social determinants of health, and vulnerable population in its deliberations. We are particularly concerned about the vulnerable population that we serve at North Suffolk. We provide treatment for mental health addictions and co-occurring illnesses. The individuals we serve include youth and young adults who are particularly vulnerable to the availability of substances such as cannabis, and whose brains and bodies are negatively impacted by the use of cannabis. The individuals we serve are in various stages of contemplation with regard to their sobriety and recovery, and often are socially and financially disadvantaged. They are vulnerable to the visible and continual presence of substances that can serve as a trigger for a lapse or a relapse. We suggest consideration of zoning regulations by using population and geographic-based information to restrict the location of cannabis retail stores to limit density and availability. In particular, in addition to the minimum distance restrictions between cannabis retail stores, consider a buffer zone between retail stores and mental health and addiction treatment facilities and programs that are licensed by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. For community safety and health protections, a cannabis education component and community engagement plan will be an important part of the implementation. Cannabis legalization is complex, and there are potential unknown legal implications as well as health and community impacts. We recognize the importance of fostering a healthy relationship between cannabis retailers in the community with the common goal of healthy community integration. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. And I know Dr. Namey has to run to clinic, so do any colleagues have questions specifically for Dr. Namey?
Yeah, I just had a quick one point and one question, just to note that when it comes to, I think some of the regulation right now, when it comes to recreational cannabis stores, there really is heavy regulation on how they can advertise. They almost can't. So I know one of the concerns was that they could be attracting folks in there, and I think that that's been handled in the regulation. But you heard a lot of folks talk about the evidence, or lack thereof, of the two being connected, proximity and increased in addiction or hurting someone's recovery. And so, and your evidence or your studies seem to indicate the exact opposite, or I just would love for you to help me understand.
Sure. No, that's a great point. So again, across multiple substances, tobacco, alcohol, and even now emerging marijuana, again, so-called physical availability is the key driver of substance use. The only one that comes close to it is price. So if you are a policy person in public health, physical availability, price, and to a lesser extent marketing are the big three, and physical availability is the most important. So specifically, physical availability is usually assessed in terms of the number of outlets and also the distances and the clustering. And so the sort of strong evidence for this in general is reflected in the fact that there are buffer zones, in virtually every state for around, things like schools and other things. So I don't think it's that scientifically controversial. When it comes to, cannabis specifically, again, this is an emerging area of research, but even more recent research again shows that the number and location of actual dispensaries being up and running is a key predictor for adult marijuana use disorder. So I don't think that this area of research is particularly controversial, certainly not in terms of its general conclusions. And again, we're getting more on cannabis specifically, as recreational cannabis is something relatively new in this country.
Good. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Councilor Baker.
Thank you, Doctor. So you heard my line of questioning about, is there any place for cannabis in the recovery sector? Like, is it a viable option, do you think? Because you hear, and mostly from veterans groups, talking about PTSD, how, marijuana helps to keep them, away from using harder drugs. What's your opinion? I know we don't have any data, but what do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, we have a very strong and actually quite permissive medical program in Massachusetts. So I think that's in some senses apart from that. The Institute of Medicine just published a large review on all the research on cannabis. So far, in terms of what it does and doesn't do, there's not sufficient evidence to say that it's useful for PTSD. One thing that is very clear is that people who use cannabis or begin to use cannabis are at far, far higher likelihood of ending up using opioids and other substances.
When they start out cannabis first, young kid, if it's cannabis first, you mean?
And the mechanisms by which that association happens are not entirely clear, but the other thing is that a lot of people with opioid use is already using cannabis, and again, they have the medical program. So in general, the idea of cannabis to treat chronic pain is not something new, but I think the issue is that there's very clear evidence that people who begin using cannabis are actually more likely to develop opioid use disorders. So again, we're concerned. The other thing I might mention with regard to addiction is that more recent research shows that the rates of marijuana use disorder are much higher than were previously appreciated, because the potency and addictiveness of marijuana has increased so much. So it used to be said that about 10% of adults and 15% of kids who used marijuana at least monthly would develop a use disorder. Those numbers have now doubled in an era in which the average potency is so much higher.
Okay. And I mean, so the medical community also comes out in favor of safe injection sites, though. So to make that legal, which I have a hard time wrapping my head around. Again, does that save lives? Yes, but I think that should be 10 or 12 on the menu of what we should be doing first. So, and I just wanted to throw that point in there. So no real point to marijuana. Yeah, this can help us in this overall epidemic.
Yeah, first of all, yeah, there's been no randomized clinical studies of the use of marijuana to treat opioid use disorder. And again, in general, what we know is that more substance use generally begets more substance use. So there may be more clinical trials about this in the future, but on balance, you know, marijuana is an important cause of substance use disorders in its own right and is strongly associated with other substance use disorders, as some of our other panelists have discussed.
More so than alcohol?
I don't know, more so or less so?
Well, you said earlier that if a and I'm thinking of a child, 12, 13, 14, whenever they're starting, if they pick up a joint first, you're saying that they're more likely to use heroin than if they started with a Budweiser?
No. No, that's all right. If I said basically, of the illicit substances, best studied is a so-called gateway drug. Marijuana is the best studied. But basically, whether it's alcohol or marijuana, early use of one substance is likely to increase the early use and subsequent addiction with multiple substances. That's what I'm.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And there's a strong correlation, in research that indicates that. Both marijuana and alcohol are on the same level playing field when it comes to the earliest onset of use, to being predisposed to addiction in later years in life.
So the earlier you pick up whatever it is you pick up, you're probably picking both of them up, then you're
and it just goes just like this.
So if a child, again, we're back at a child, if a person can put that use off till like first beer at, I know it's probably unlikely, but 20, so then that increases the likelihood that they will not go down that road.
Exactly.
So tie your kids up till they're 20?
Educate.
Or I'll tie my kids up till they're 20?
Educate and try to provide as much information as that you possibly can around.
Okay, thank you.
And keep them busy.
Thank you, Councilor Baker.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Good transition anyway. Thank you, Dr. Namey. Do my colleagues have questions for Mr. Kelly, Ms. O'Leary, Ms. Hanton? Councilor Edwards?
So I wanted to thank Jack and Katie especially for coming here today. I thought your testimony was actually probably the most important and also the most impactful. Both of you have been through addiction, and both of you are survivors and thrivers with carrying that very much, that beast with you every single day. And both of you voted to legalize marijuana, and I think that was so important to hear that folks who are in that struggle also still understand that it's not just about the substance, it's about the prohibition, it's about government and how it does regulate, how it does punish, and how it categorizes individuals who are then also seeking help. It's so much bigger than the drug at hand. I think Katie especially, I think you are the most incredible expert here today, and I wanted to stand up and applaud after you spoke, because I think you're the only person that I've heard from who's actually used this treatment facility, North Suffolk Mental Health, and have gone through it based on the actual physical location, knows what it feels like to walk up to that, will know, and could predict how it would feel like to walk past a recreational facility to go get treatment. And your statement about how this would have negatively impacted you, this proximity, is by far the most important statement I think I've heard today. And so I want to say thank you for that, because again, you did vote to legalize, so it's not a question of whether marijuana should be available. It's a question of proximity to this particular treatment facility that you have used. And I think that was by far the best testimony from any of the experts, all the degrees, everything. So thank you so much for that. So my question then to both of you, especially, and yes, obviously to you as well, is the Balance Act. It is a matter of balance. So what do you see as an appropriate balance for recreational marijuana to exist, knowing that people are still getting treatment? What's the balance that you see? I don't care if you have a distance idea, if you have the combination of the education idea. I know for the official statement from North Suffolk Mental Health, but what do you see as the balance? What strikes the balance?
It's a great question. Just wanted to say I was blown away by Katie's testimony. Me and Katie, for full disclosure, grew up with each other, and the fact of her and I sitting here is a borderline miracle doing this. So yeah, more than borderline.
Miracle.
An actual miracle. And so I think that one of the things, again, it's hard to address it here because we're talking about zoning, and I'm not quite sure how you would do it. But I think that the opportunity is someone like Katie should actually be on some sort of advisory board with the facility that is going to be in close proximity. And that's basically one of the things that I'm trying to advocate for, is that there's nobody like somebody like her who can understand some of the dangers and put in place policies that are to make facilities or dispensaries or recreational places good neighbors. So make sure that we're being responsible. This is a new industry, and it's an opportunity to make sure that we're being preventative, but also allowing people to sell cannabis. I don't think that myself or Katie, and quite honestly, a lot of people in recovery, especially the more younger, I guess, demographic, we're not necessarily against marijuana, because we've seen so many people that we grew up with go to jail over this, commit suicide over this, be arrested over this. This is real personal to us. And I think that one of the things that we're concerned about is that when these industries come in here, we're not at the table.
Right.
And that's a problem. And I don't mean just, hey, what do you think? I'm talking about really equity stake at the table, because we care about this. We truly care about it. So we're going to make sure that these places are going to be responsible. At the same time, not trying to stop them from making money, or for somebody that wants to recreationally use and can do it responsible, they should be able to do it without being arrested or anything like that. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know if any drug should be a crime. I fully believe that. I think that we have to readdress our whole war on drugs. But that aside, I think the first step is the people that have been harmed, which was the spirit of this law, should be at the table with these facilities.
Katie, did you?
So, I mean, I know I heard Jack talk a little bit about the dangers of this. I just want to say that I see the benefits of having marijuana dispensaries too. I mean, I have people in my family that use marijuana recreationally. Some of them are a lot older than me, and I don't want to see them getting arrested, obviously, for and losing their career due to the fact that they had to go out and buy marijuana on the black market. However, the population that I serve and work with on a day-to-day basis is extremely vulnerable. A lot of them are coerced into treatment by the criminal justice system. That doesn't mean we cannot motivate them to want to live in active recovery. However, I don't think that we should tempt them if we don't have to. And I like what Councilor McCarthy was saying about making the regulations more stringent at the beginning, because you can always loosen the reins later on rather than making them extremely loose and try to tighten them later. I think that's going to be a lot more difficult. As to finding the balance, I don't really know how to do that. I'm not an expert when it comes to that piece.
Oh, you are.
Yeah, you are.
You are. You are.
You could be sitting up here, I think, someday.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Councilor Sabi-George?
I don't have any questions. I guess I have a comment. I really just found your presentations very meaningful and thoughtful, and important for us to hear and take in. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Baker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You look good, buddy.
Not as good as you.
Talk a little bit about, and a little bit personal, if you don't
Yeah.
that's fine. Talk about when you were out there, like, could you see yourself going into a recreational marijuana store? Like, would you spend, you're on heroin.
Yeah.
Availability, the doctor talked about availability. We all know we can get heroin, fentanyl, whatever it is, all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Would you take that $10 that you just got and go buy a joint?
No.
Nope. Right.
Never.
Yeah. So
I mean, I don't know how we're supposed to act professional, be like real here. I mean, the last thing that I would ever want when I was dope sick is to be stoned.
Yeah.
Like, the last thing. I'd rather just be dope sick.
Yeah. So did you, and another personal one, did you start with weed? Did you start with
No.
Budweiser?
No, neither.
You went
prescription drugs.
Okay.
So with all due respect to it,
So when you were young, you didn't go up, you didn't go to the schoolyard and drink.
And what Kim is talking about is real. I mean, it definitely made me more susceptible of it, but that was when it was illegal. But as far as why I got into heroin, I mean, it had nothing to do per se with that initially. It was prescription drugs.
Yeah.
And to further along with that, one of the things that I get concerned about is when we focus on this, again, it gets lost that prescription drugs continue to be legal. I mean, I'll tell you right now, my whole thing happened when I had surgery for my shoulder injury because of a hockey injury. I would love to have been sent home with marijuana as opposed to opiates. I think my life would be totally different right now. I might have had an alcohol problem, possibly, because of the DNA that I have and all the evidence that talks about the disease. I would not have stuck a needle in my arm.
Yeah. So that's what I think that the medical community has to be aware of. That you know, we're gonna not think twice about sending someone out the door with perks or whatever else, but like this could be the end of the world for the medical industry. I just don't. It's not adding up with me. I think we should be trying it anyway.
Well, the medical community right now doesn't. They have no stake in it. They have stake in prescription drugs. I mean, we all want to eat, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, not to try to be rude or anything, but I mean, that's how I see it.
Yeah.
What's your interest?
Yeah. Katie, thank you for your testimony. Thank all you guys. But can you talk a little bit about so your facility that is outpatient, so people get out of detox and then they're going there every day after that. So the most tender people that in recovery.
Yes.
And so will you talk a little bit about talk about the trigger? What do you mean by a trigger? How is like if this store happens to have like a green leaf or whatever, which we ban, we're not gonna like the. Yeah. You know, so how is that going to trigger you? Will you give me your experience if you're okay with it?
Sure, yeah, I'm fine with that. So, yes, we do serve the most vulnerable population. Some of them are direct hospital discharges. Some of them are coming straight from court. Some of them are in our residential program. And we also have a youth adolescent intensive outpatient program. So yes, they do come daily for the most part for about 3 months. That's in the intensive outpatient program. Mm-hmm. Some of them come directly from detox or from CSS, which is clinical stabilization services. However, I mean, they congregate outside beforehand, they congregate outside afterwards, they become a large family and community because they get very close to each other because they spend a lot of time with each other, you know, day in and day out, all receiving the same services. But I know for me, at least that's how I felt when I was there. And it's just difficult to say what can trigger any individual at any time. And like the trigger could just be reliving some past events. Like for me, my primary drug of choice is heroin. If my primary diagnosis out of the DSM-5 is F1121, which is opioid use disorder, severe, in sustained remission. And however, anything can trigger that for me. I can smell alcohol. If I drink it, I'm gonna pick up a needle.
Yeah.
If I smoke a joint, I'm gonna pick up a needle. There is no in-between for me.
Mm-hmm.
But like any little thing can trigger you. It can be a smell, it can be a touch, it can be a taste. I mean, I know I've gone to weddings in the past. Jackie was with me. The bartender gave one of
Can he dance?
A little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to be able to dance a little bit, buddy.
Yeah. So, and I know one of the bartenders on accident put alcohol in a non-alcoholic drink, and like just that alone can be triggering to somebody who is in long-term recovery, because it's like you second guess yourself and you question yourself, and it's like, well, is that really a relapse? I didn't do it on purpose. Like, what are my motives behind this? So I think just having something in, you can't say that, I mean, I know it's illegal to walk outside of a dispensary and light up a joint, but but you can't necessarily say that no one's going to. I mean,
Yeah.
people drive, it's illegal to drive in your car and smoke a joint, but it happens all the time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't think we should try and set people up for failure. So if we can prevent it.
And like Jack, when you were out there, the last thing you wanted to do was smoke a joint.
At that point, right, but what Katie and Kim have talked about, there is potentially, you know, a trigger to want to do something else. And for me, as Katie talked about, I would never go to anything else. I mean, that's what I would want to shoot heroin. I mean, there's nothing. It's like climbing Mount Everest. You know, every other mountain besides that is never going to be good enough. So I'll always go back to that. One comment I'd like to make that Councilman McCarthy brought up that I think is incredible is the 3% general fund, which I have, again, the spirit of the law was not to be that. And it's great if we create parks and we do all this other stuff, but that's not what it was for the 3%. I don't know how we do it, but the 3% should be going to prevention programs, addiction programs. This is an opportunity that we tried to do with the alcohol tax, and now we have an opportunity to do it here, but yet it goes back into the general fund again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a problem.
But I think we're all trying to figure out what the tax money is going to be like. When they first open up, it's medical first, so there's no taxes in the first rollout. So we as the city are going to need to build this infrastructure when the taxes start coming in. So we'll need an infrastructure, but then you would hope that once that infrastructure is in place, the money then goes towards what it should be going to. So for us, we're going to need to hire multiple people to do this, and there isn't money there to do it yet until the tax revenue comes in, which won't be there for, a year or whatever. So we're kind of behind the 8 ball. I agree with you. I'm not happy about it going. The taxes going into general fund, I'm okay with. It's the mitigation money, that 3% right there, that should be staying where those dispensaries are. However it is used. So, and you would hope that the state, with their 17% that they're going to get, right? You would hope that the state is going to fund some of this. Is going to support cities like Boston. That Jack, we're doing an awful lot in this city, and it doesn't seem like we can get in front of it.
Well, and another comment on this, just the fear that I have at the Wynn Casino, which is in your district, there was all these promises made about we're going to try to, social causes and social good, things like addiction. They made a big issue out of that they were going to try to help the surrounding communities do that. And then they wrote a check to the RISE organization, which is great, but Jack Connors is going to distribute that money, and he's awesome, but how does that get filtered down to us?
Yeah.
It doesn't. Unless you're an expert and you're going through it and seeing where exactly the funds went. And it's just that top-down approach with this, it's not affecting the work that they're doing. I mean, it's just not. I mean, these are the people that are on the ground every day. Yeah. So when I hear elected officials, and I don't mean everybody's well-intentioned, sit there and say, well, the numbers are getting better, I go down to Dunkin' Donuts and I see people that are still doing the same thing.
It doesn't look it.
Right.
It doesn't look like the numbers are getting better. But numbers, you can move them whatever way you manipulate them. And election years, of course we're down. But I mean, where would we be at if everybody and their brother didn't have not Suboxone, naloxone right on them?
Right.
Where would we be? Would be talking about 10,000.
A lot more deaths.
We'd be talking about 10,000 people a year in Massachusetts. So thank you.
And last point in closing, like Katie said, there's a good opportunity with marijuana here. I am not at all against marijuana. I think there are some really good opportunities. I just want to make sure that we don't miss it. I just don't want to see people just get rich off this, and then that's it, and then they go home. That's not the point of this. So thank you.
So maybe just a quick point to follow.
I think everybody's getting sick of me.
I'm done. Is maybe like that when the definition of recovery center, maybe it should be very specific towards the most tender of the population, where maybe there might be someone else is further along in recovery that they might be okay. So I would caution that sort of, that definition there. I don't think it's appropriate to have right next door. Is it right next door to your?
Directly.
Yeah. Directly next door. Yeah.
And I'd just like to elaborate a little bit in regards to a licensed facility is different than sober housing or self-help groups and things of that nature. What we serve, the mentally ill population that we serve with co-occurring with substance abuse is the most vulnerable population that in the community. And for them to have the ability to have their own internal coping mechanisms in place. You're talking to two individuals that have taken a long time to develop those. The folks that we're serving are nowhere near, where Katie and Jack are, and I think, and they're articulating it so wonderfully, and they're being an advocate for a population that doesn't have a voice and that is so high risk.
I remember, it was probably 20 years ago now, I had a recovering addict, heroin addict, say to me that he was a miracle because nobody gets off heroin, and to have two people here, you are a miracle. Everybody that's able to get off that street and live a productive life, it's a miracle, and so few people are getting it now. So,
but they need the support, and they need all of us. It takes all of us to help support this along the way.
It takes a village.
It certainly does.
I couldn't help myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. Councilor McCarthy.
Takes a village. Come on, will you? I just want to thank you guys for being here. Katie and Jack, thanks for sharing your story. Jack, I tried to get to your book signing, and I couldn't get to it, so I'll take you out to lunch. You bring a book, I'll buy it.
Thank you.
And I don't want just a signature. I want like a crazy story.
You'll get 2 pages worth.
Jack and I have been friends for over a decade. We campaigned hard together 6 years ago.
2013,
yeah. So
you beat me. Both of you beat me, actually.
Yeah, no, I had nothing to do with it. But Councilor Baker's right. You guys are miracles, and your story is very powerful, both of you. And it's great that you're here, and thanks for your efforts. And certainly, as we go forward with more and more hearings, as this process grows out, both of your words are going to be stuck in my head as we move forward, and making sure that there's an equitable stake at the table of the people who know most about it, which is you and not me. So, thanks.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy. And I'll just echo thank you to all of you all as well. And know that we will continue to see you in these seats, and at the table. So really appreciate your time and your wisdom. Any other further comments for this panel from my colleagues? Okay, so we'll transition to the next panel. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
And take another pause for public testimony. Again, there is no one signed up. If anyone wishes to testify who was not signed up, feel free to come down at this time if you wanted to make a statement. Okay. And Councilor Edwards has a statement on behalf of someone who couldn't be here.
So this statement is sent to me from Representative Modero from East Boston. He and I both represent East Boston, the community. And the quote is, "The proposed location of a recreational marijuana dispensary at 24 Porter Street is inappropriate given the close proximity to a facility treating mental health and substance abuse disorders. I've spoken with the folks at North Suffolk Mental Health, and they've expressed concerns about the effect of this business on their patients. I do not object to recreational marijuana facilities, and I have no issue with the other aspects of this proposal, but I oppose the siting of any recreational marijuana facility adjacent to a treatment facility." That's from Representative Marto from East Boston.
Thank you. Again, seeing no takers for public testimony, we'll transition to the final panel. I'd like to invite down Kamani Jefferson from the Massachusetts Recreational Consumer Council. And then Councilor Edwards had planned for Roger Donahue and Mr. Murphy from the Mass Package Stores Association. I don't know if they're here or if Charlie wanted to come down again. Thank you both. Kamani, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself for the record, any affiliation, and feel free to make any opening statement.
Sure. Thank you guys for having me. My name is Kamani Jefferson. I am the president and registered lobbyist of the Massachusetts Recreational Consumer Council. Our mission is to continuously work with local and state governmental bodies to ensure the safety and well-being of recreational marijuana consumers, marijuana businesses, and the general public. We do this in two ways, through informational media, whether it's through educational pamphlets or live streaming different political activity across the state. We also have a lot of community events educating folks on the law, on the regulations, and on the plant itself here in Boston and across the Commonwealth. And we also, I'll just name some of the things we support: local cannabis, so like equitable licensing, quality control, responsible and safe consumption through our Consumer Responsibly campaign, social use, expungement, and research. I just want to say a couple of things. I started consuming cannabis way too young, and I believe it was because it was illicit, and there was no barriers to stop me getting that cannabis, versus I started consuming alcohol at a later age because of it being legal. The only time I did try other illicit drugs was because I was very intoxicated from alcohol and never wanted to consume other illicit drugs because of cannabis. And again, I just want to remind folks, because it was illicit, it's the reason why I think consumption is high, versus if we had legal cannabis at a long time ago, the consumption might be lower. And also want to endorse an advisory board for dispensaries. I think public participation is seriously lacking for not just dispensaries, but establishments coming to the city of Boston, and a lot of folks just don't understand the law. So having an advisory board in the community, I think, would be very, very useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamani. Any further thoughts, Charlie?
I'll, kind of reintroduce. I work with Roger Donahue and Jack Murphy, and we represent the Package Store Association. Not to, you already heard what I said earlier, so I think I got all the points across, but I do think the package store owners take the responsibility very seriously. They, work with the community, and they really want to collaborate with law enforcement and the community to be good neighbors, and we would love to work with you as you think about any proposals.
Thank you. Councilor Edwards?
Thank you both for being here. I think it's a great to have the industry perspective as well. So do you have an opinion about, in general, you've been watching this unfold in your capacity throughout the entire state. So I'm just curious about your thoughts in general about the proximity to, or if you have any at all, just your initial thoughts.
I think it can hinder the growth of the industry. Jerome Smith said up to 50, but if there is another barrier to entry, where will these 50 go? And if they can't open up successfully, folks will just turn back to the illicit market. So I think it will hinder the growth, and in terms of equity, I think it will hinder an equitable industry coming to the city as well, because folks are really scrambling for land that fits the land use of zoning. So now if you just add another regulation, it'll just make it harder, and the folks with money and the folks with connections can use that to their advantage versus the folks from communities of color or communities that have been disproportionately harmed. It might hinder trying to start a small local business here in the city.
So when it comes to do you have a recommendation then? What are your thoughts on the half mile that we currently have between the industries? And also, what are your thoughts, if you have any, on, I think I suggested earlier, that lumping cultivation with retail is adding too many players into the half-mile buffer zone, that maybe the half-mile should be limited to a certain kind of industry player versus the cultivation? So two thoughts, the half-mile and the labeling of the industry actors.
So the half-mile buffer, I think, makes more sense for retailers versus with cultivation and manufacturing. There's also transporting licenses. There's also research and testing facilities. I don't think they need that because the traffic will be less. You really won't have consumers going to a manufacturer that's going to go to the retailer. And then you said the industry, like having the half-mile radius between each license. What was your question? Or
yeah, in general, we have that right now. And
right.
So, yeah.
I think Brian from BPDA suggested a while ago that, or someone from the Walsh administration suggested that if you're an economic empowerment applicant or your equity applicant, you would be able to bypass the half-mile radius. I don't know if that's been put in writing, so maybe just solidifying equity or economic empowerment applicants won't maybe have to abide by that half-mile radius, but it's still unclear. And I think that half-mile radius, again, hinders the growth of this industry. You already have that 500 buffer zone from schools, and then you have to also have that half-mile radius. It's just going to hinder the growth of the city, and then indirectly will turn people back to the illicit market.
And I personally 100% agree with the advisory board. I think in earlier hearing I had supported the creation of almost like a BEC version of when it comes to emerging industries, not just marijuana. Right. It could be scooters. It could be anything that comes to the city of Boston, that we have a sitting board or a commission that is dealing with how is this going to be rolled out equitably? How do we ensure that all Bostonians can benefit, our consumers, but also able to produce? And so I don't know your thoughts, or was that what you were also thinking about in terms of an advisory board? Yeah, I think each community, so in the regs, you have to have like a community impact plan. You also have a diversity plan. Maybe the city of Boston can also create that. Each community should have like an advisory board across the city, and that advisory board will work with, whatever licensed establishment comes to the community. And like the gentleman earlier said before, it's not like, oh, hey, what do you think? It's, no, you're actively a part of the conversation, because what we're seeing in the city, and not just here in Boston, across the whole state, is community members just don't know what's going on, and they find out at the last minute at the community outreach meeting, or, you read the host agreement on the city of Boston's page a month after it's signed. I was a little upset to find that, Andrea Cabal's host agreement was up, and she signed it in October, and I had no idea that happened. So, if there was an advisory board, there would be more public participation going on. So transparency is also Yes,
key. Transparency for sure.
My questions with regards to the packaging industry, you had mentioned that there were some specific concerns that they had with this proposed, buffer or whatever zone. And so explain for me what the concerns would be, since many of you are already established. There's a very limited amount of liquor licenses that are going out. Tell me about the impacts that you're foreseeing or concerns.
Sure. I think our biggest concern is, I know you mentioned earlier that this wouldn't apply retroactively.
It can't. I don't think.
Right.
Yeah.
The constitutional issue. So our biggest concern, and I'm not sure how the language would work here in the constitutionality, but if you have someone who owns a liquor license and they're planning to use the value of that license to retire, will they be able to sell that license to a new owner, or will the location of it perhaps prevent the transfer of the license? So I think that's something you'd have to work out in the language of the proposal. But the major concern is that the license will lose its value if it can't be transferred.
Okay. And so we'll work out that. I'm assuming they have the license and the location for that place already. So what are your...
Well, yeah, the concern would be that when they go to sell that license.
Yeah, and that maybe a treatment facility moved in that time?
Or there already was one there and
okay.
before this, ordinance took effect. The concern is that when they go to sell it, and again, this is, to be determined, I guess, but if they're not allowed to sell it because of a treatment center that's nearby, they've now lost the value of that license. Okay, so your perspective is really just license-based and the value. Do you have any perspective on proximity and health at all? I mean, unlike recreational marijuana facilities, you can advertise a lot more. Some people would argue target to different populations more. That is, honestly, alcohol has the biggest body count of all substance abuse. So there was no health component to your analysis, or? No, the proposal on its face isn't. We're not. There's merit to it. We're not outright opposed to that. I would say I think the package stores have worked closely with communities, and I've been to community meetings where liquor stores are trying to open, and there's a lot of opponents to it. So I think it is important that the community has a voice, and if the location of the proposed store is inappropriate, then I would hope that the community would be able to make their voice heard and potentially have it cited somewhere else. So yeah, I think on its face, it's the goal of the proposal is laudable.
Mm-hmm.
I just think the devil's in the details.
Right. And what are either of your thoughts on deliveries? I mean, I would think that to get over the whole zoning, the whole impact on community traffic, all those things, that's a viable, or should be considered a viable opportunity to just directly have it going to consumers. It's no one's business. It's happening in their private home. Either thoughts? I know there are already some services that provide.
Do that, yeah.
You guys would what?
Some package stores do offer delivery, so.
They do. Yeah. No, I know a couple. So your thoughts?
I'm a huge proponent of delivery. I know the Cannabis Control Commission hasn't rolled out those licenses yet, and they will be talking about that in the new year around February. They're going to be putting a working group together, and any municipality that wants to have delivery can be a part of that process. I know also with social use, they're going to be doing the same thing in the new year. So they're still talking about that. Medical dispensaries can deliver now. So patients do have that option. But I think delivery is important because if we look at the illicit market, that's how a lot of people get their cannabis is through illicit delivery activity. So if we want to, kind of transition folks to the legal market, I think delivery licenses is a great way to do that. And also for equity, I think delivery is very important because, again, we understand that market and the equitable side of it, and it also can transition consumers, illicit consumers, to legal consumers.
That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Sabi-George?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to both panelists. Really appreciate your time.
No problem.
And we'll pause again in case any takers wish to offer any final thoughts, members of the public. Okay, seeing none. Councillor Edwards, would you like to make a closing statement?
Very briefly, I want to thank everyone for coming here today. I know a lot of folks had to leave. I think this is an important conversation. I think it was a valuable one, bringing all perspectives, and it's necessary that we do it now rather than waiting until after the fact. I personally still want to have more conversations as I think about this. Katie's testimony was particularly touching to me, but I don't think, but her testimony on both sides saying it should be legal and there is a place for marijuana, and also that it would have impacted her negatively if it was in this particular location. So when we think about policy, when we think about moving forward, we need to both think in the specific incidents, but also in the larger city impact and how this may hurt a lot of people who just want to start a business, may just want to be a part of something new, but at the same time, we don't want it to be starting a business on the backs of people who are already struggling. So it's the balance, it's the conversation. I invite folks to continue to contact my office if you have thoughts about it. But I intend to bring this up in the new year, to continue this conversation, to talk about this this buffer, and to look at the populations continually. So this is just the beginning.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Sabi-George.
No closing statement. Thank you.
Thank you. This will conclude our hearing on docket number 1511, order for a hearing regarding regulations of the proximity of certain businesses to recovery facilities. This hearing is adjourned.